In this video, we are going to learn about the last method, that is reduce. In our previous methods that we learned, like forEach returns undefined, map returns same size array, filter returns same size or smaller size, find returns an individual element, find index returns the index of that element, sum returns true or false, every returns true or false, sort returns same size of array but it also mutates the original array. Let's move on to reduce. So reduce is used for reducing a collection of value into a different shape of value, or you can say it to be a single value. So let's just take an example to work on reduce. Say here I have a collection of elements, or you can say collection of numbers. What if I want to sum all these numbers? So if you want to do that and you want to use forEach, how will you do that? So you'll say numbers dot forEach, because I need access to each element, and what I need to do here is this num element needs to be added into another variable. So we'll create sum and we'll call it 0. So here each time, first time you're getting access to 1, so what will you do? You will say sum should be equal to sum plus num. So you're adding the value of num into sum on each iteration. So I'm getting the value, adding it. Next time I'm getting 4, I'm adding it, it becomes 5, then 265, I'm adding it, and at last you can just say console.log sum. So this is one of the example of reducing. So what you're doing, you are reducing multiple values to one value, that is sum of that value. Similarly, what I can do is, what if I want to concatenate all these values into one string altogether? So for that, I'll say all colors is equal to empty string, and here I can say colors dot forEach. For each element I will get access to color, and all I need to do is say all colors is equal to all colors plus color. Now if you just log the value by saying console.log all colors, here you'll see the value got reduced to a single value. So here you can see multiple values or multiple elements got reduced to a single string value here. That is another example of using reduce. So here we are reducing multiple values to a single value, that is sum. Here we are reducing multiple color name to a single string, that is collection of color name. So this is how normally we reduce the value. So reduce method is here to help us doing this, because there are some problems here. You have to create a special variable outside and you have to keep changing that variable. So in this case, we have to manage multiple variables. Even in this case, we have to manage multiple variables. So I'll just comment this code and try to write this code using reduce. And we'll try to compare them to understand how reduce actually works. So I want to reduce numbers into one single element. So I'll say numbers.reduce. Reduce accepts two parameters. Normally, whatever method we have learned, it accepts only one parameter, that is callback function. Reduce accepts two parameters, a callback function and an initial value. You must be thinking, what is initial value? You can think of initial value to be the initial value of some variable when we wrote it in this way. So first thing is a callback function. So I'll just write an arrow function here. And what should be the initial value? So here in this case, we initialize the value to 0 because we are adding numbers. In other methods like map, filter, forEach, find, index, we were getting access to individual element, index, and array. In reduce, you get access to 4 elements. The first one is accumulator. The second one is current value. Third is index, and fourth is array. You must be thinking, what is accumulator now? So here if you look at this, the reason we define this variable outside is because every time this loop runs, this value doesn't get reset to 0. That's why we are putting it outside. So that is the same value that accumulator is. I'm not going to use index and array, and I'll change this current value to num because it is num. I'll just make it smaller and I'll call it accumulator to be ACC. So the first value of accumulator will become the initial value that you passed. That is very similar to how we did it here, sum is equal to 0. So here we have 0, the value of accumulator. As soon as this loop runs for the first time, the value of num is 1, the value of sum became 0 plus 1 to be 1. Now the value of sum after first loop became 1. So here I will need to change the value of accumulator to the next value. So the callback function, whatever it returns, becomes the next value of accumulator. Let's just see it in action. So I will return whatever is the value of accumulator, add the value of num to it. So think about it. Accumulator is 0 right now. The value of num for the first time will be 1. And what we are returning from the callback function? So callback function is returning 0 plus 1, and that is 1. So I'm returning 1 from here. So now 1 gets returned from this callback function. So whatever gets returned from the callback function becomes the next value of accumulator. So now the value of accumulator will become 1. What is the value of num right now? So the second value is 4. So it will be 4. Now we are saying accumulator plus num. So accumulator is 1, num is 4, the value becomes 5, and whatever gets returned from the callback function will become the next value of accumulator. So now that the value of accumulator will become 5, and it will keep going on, and at last whatever is the value of accumulator will get returned from here. Using this, we can just sum all the elements of the array, and we can call it sum variable. And let's see what is the value of sum. So we'll say sum, and it is 487. It's the same value that was coming out from here. The benefit of using reduce is here we have to define this variable outside, so it's very easy to change that. But here you don't have to manage extra variable. You're just doing everything by itself here. So reduce function accepts two parameters, a callback function and initial value. That callback function gets access to 4 elements: accumulator, current value, index, and array. The initial value of accumulator is whatever is the value you pass as initial value, and the next value of accumulator is whatever gets returned from the callback function. Let's just try to write similar code, but this time we'll write it for colors variable here. So we'll do it like this, and we'll say all colors is equal to colors.reduce. The initial value of accumulator, this time instead of 0, it will be empty string, because we initialize it to empty string. We are getting accumulator, that is initial value, and here we'll change it to color. Now if we access the value of all colors, we'll see and we'll get a very similar output that we were seeing it earlier. So using reduce, you can reduce a collection of value into one value or any different set. Few things to notice about reduce is, here reduce is returning a number, and in this case reduce is returning a string, and that is why reduce is very powerful. Reduce can return any kind of value that you want. So just to draw the diagram, we can just see it like this. If you have an array and you're using map over it, you'll get the same size of array. So initially, if you have an array, in return it will also have an array. Similarly, when you're using map, same is the case when you have it with filter. It also returns an array. Now if we move on to next one and say reduce you can apply it on array, but it can return any kind of value that you want. So if the initial value is a number, it can return number. If the initial value is a string, it can return string. Similarly, if it is an object, it can return an object. If it is an array, it can return an array or any other value. So whatever reduce is going to return depends on what value you initialized it to. Here we initialize it to string, it is going to return string. Here we initialize it to 0, and that's why we are getting number as a final value. There is one thing to notice here, is whenever you're writing reduce, don't forget to return the accumulator value, because if you're not returning anything from here, undefined will become the value of accumulator and it will throw an error. Say for example, I just don't return anything. I'm just changing the value but not returning anything. So here if you look at all colors, it will be undefined because this function is going to return undefined. So you will have to return the value. So first thing I always do when I'm writing reduce is to return the accumulator itself. So in this way, we learned about reduce. Reduce is used for reducing multiple element of array into an individual element, and that element can be a number, string, array, object, or it can be any other thing.